Welcome to the Castle of the Quest, the home of OD&D. And in this series, if you've been watching so far, you'll have noticed that I like to discuss the original game as played in the early 70s, from 1974 when it was published. And I like to discuss how ambiguous the rules of OD&D are and its history and development. And at the forefront of all of this, I discuss my OD&D pencil and paper campaign. So I'm going to start off with a recap. The last adventure I ran was on the 17th of October, and I'm using one time, so it's been quite a while, but as I explained in the last video and my last Tales of Mystara podcast episode, I broke my leg, so I've been out of the game for a little bit. So I have this adventure record sheet, and after each adventure is finished, I like to record basically a snapshot of what happened in the game, and that's what I use these adventure record sheets for. And this sheet that I made myself is based on one provided in the D&D Rules Cyclopedia, which was published in 1991, and if you're a BECMI fan, then you're probably very familiar with the Rules Cyclopedia. So I've sort of customised mine so that it is more suitable for running a OD&D campaign, especially one where you're playing solo, which is what I'm doing. So looking at the adventure record sheet, the party went on a wilderness urban adventure which lasted for one day. So in summary, the events of the adventure unfolded as follows. The party continued to explore the land of Pylea. They found a castle upon a lake to the northwest of the last redoubt, which is their home base. The occupant patriarch ventured out with his guards and demanded a 10% tithe from the party's wealth. Considerably outmatched, they obliged without hesitation. They then moved west through the forest of Evilshore, eventually happening upon a clearing where the village of Greenford is situated. They had to pay a toll to pass through the gatehouse and into the village. Whilst exploring the village, they encountered giant rats terrorising stabled horses outside an inn. They managed to scare these rats off with torchfire, but unfortunately the innkeeper was too destitute to offer any reward. They also encouraged a couple of rakes who hurled all kinds of abuse at the questing knights. However, the party did eventually convince them to join the next expedition below the Castle of the Quest. The rakes can offer some muscle in order to give the party a fair chance of successfully delving down to level 2 of the maze. So the party only ended up coming out with a total XP from that adventure of 40, which after sharing it between the 9 characters in the party was only 4 points of XP each. It was worth it because we started getting into how to work at doing a urban adventure in a solo game. So it's quite an exciting time for me as a player to kind of face a new challenge as to how I can procedurally generate urban settings and various other types of settlements. And we're only just kind of getting into the whole wilderness thing. So before I get into this video properly, I just want to discuss a couple of things. Firstly, as you can see, I'm on the screen. And the reason why I decided to do this was I just wanted to try and make these videos seem a little bit more off the cuff and a little bit more kind of personal. I'm largely just kind of sat here just talking through my OD&D campaign and sharing it. I'm trying to avoid like having the videos heavily scripted or prepared. I just kind of want to, you know, sit down, discuss what's going on, show you a few bits and pieces, and together we can kind of have a look through OD&D as a game system and sort of you know, go through the challenges that arise with the ambiguity of the rules, and just kind of discuss its history, discuss how I apply the rules and how I think they should be applied. And just coming back to the whole appearing on camera thing, I'm aware that the lighting is not great. Also, the kind of, I've got like a background removal tool to try and make the whole thing seem a bit more immersive. You know, I've obviously got the image in the background going on, but I'm using a background removal tool, and unfortunately it's not the best. I do have a green screen. It's one I bought off Amazon that you just kind of fold out, but it seems to be a bit flickery. We'll get through it. So just, I apologise for the lack of technical quality, but hopefully it won't get too much in the way. But yeah, let me know if it's an issue, if it's distracting or whatever, just let me know. I always play this campaign at the table with pencil and paper to really capture the aesthetic, but I do like to type up the sheets on the computer for safekeeping. So I've got a digital record. I can print them out, punch them, put them in a folder. If anything happens, I spill coffee on it or anything like that, I can just throw it away, print it again. So it's nice to have a record to refer back to at a later date. And it's just kind of like, you know, a little trip down memory lane, going through these previous adventures that I've run my characters through is probably the more precise way of saying it. So currently the campaign date as of this recording is the 27th of October 2023. This isn't where I'm stuck in the campaign. This is as far as these video sessions of me reporting the campaign to you as the viewer. This is where it's at the moment. So I'm reporting on everything from the 17th of October 2023 to the 27th of October of 2023. And you might ask, why has 10 days passed since the last adventure, from the 17th to the 27th? Because the last adventure was only one day in length. If you watch my last episode, they went out into the Pylean wilderness, and they visited Greenford, and they spent just a day doing that and returned home. So why have 10 days passed? And that's because I'm playing 1-1 time. So I put the game down on the 17th, and I didn't pick it up again until the 27th. So that's why the campaign date for the following adventure was the 27th, because I'd not been at the table in those 10 days since the last session. So since the last session, the party made no change to their current roster, having lost no one, which is always good. And I think up till now, I think every time I've run a session, at least one character has died, if not more. So going into a new session, what I usually do is I fill out a party creation and reference sheet, and I include the date of the campaign there, as the party are preparing to go out on the next adventure. And it's just basically, this sheet is so that I have a quick reference to the whole party's abilities. So rather than using individual character sheets, I find it much easier to just have this sheet that I can reference. So it has the characters' ability scores across the board. The ones that are bracketed are the adjusted score. So if I've, adjusted a score up, or and as a result, another score has been adjusted down. If you're not sure how this works, look at the ability score adjustment rules in OD&D Book 1, But yeah, I just put those in brackets so that I'm aware of the difference, because there is some situations where an adjusted score it gets omitted. So, for example, if a fighter, and this is based on the rules in Greyhawk that have fighters earning extra encumbrance for having high strength and being able to bash down doors easier, things like that. Some of them they get +1 to hits, I think. Some of these abilities that they gain have to be from a raw strength score. It can't be an adjusted strength score. So that's why it's important to differentiate between the original score and the adjustment. And I have like a quick list of characters' abilities, so I can reference, you know, what do they need to roll to open a door or hear a sound? Do they have penalties to their hit rolls, to their encumbrance, to missile, fire, and so on? And obviously I note down magic users' spells that they have prepared for the day, and what weapons they have, and the armor class, and also the movement speed of the party. So that's part of what I do to prepare for a game before I sit down to actually roll the dice. And sometimes it does involve rolling dice, because it's also the sheet I use when I'm rolling up new characters who will join the party to replace characters who have died. And then the next thing I do to prepare for an adventure is put a plan of action in place, and I just record the date, the activity that I want to do, and some rough notes as to what they plan to do. So on the 27th of October, the party plan to return to the Castle of the Quest and explore level 2 of the dungeon with the help of the rakes, which will take a double share of the treasure. And I also record the marching order going into an adventure. So I have the rakes at the front because they are the real muscle, being 8th level fighters. Hilda will sort of be slightly further back between the two, because she's going to be doing things like opening doors, listening at doors. And then we have Bree, Viridis and Thrandia, with Bree and Thrandia being on the left and right wing, so they can hopefully take advantage of being able to split move and fire, or get a clean shot off from the wings. And then the 3 magic users will stand behind those, and they will be in charge of mapping, providing torchlight. And Bart and Drago will be at the back, because they will basically hold the back ranks and try and protect the magic users. The plan of action, basically, since last time that the party wanted to put forward, is they wanted to return to the Castle of the Quest and explore the 2nd level of the dungeon with the help of the 2 8th level fighters that they picked up in Greenford. These were the Drunken Rakes, so they were only willing to participate into a delve with my characters if they were given a double share of the treasure. And they were already running wildly low on funds, the party, before they set out to Greenford. And with the toll and tithe that they had to pay, and the fact they did not pick up anything valuable on their last outing, they were in dire straits. They couldn't even afford to furnish themselves with enough rations to go around, so 6 of the 9 characters were forced to advance 1 step on the food index chart. So what exactly does this mean? As I discussed in session 8 of the Castle of the Quest, the food index is a mechanic taken from the Outdoor Survival board game. And use of the Outdoor Survival playing board and its terrain penalties were encouraged for use in an OD&D campaign. And for lack of rules for starvation and thirst, even in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, they aren't there. This is kind of left up to the referee to come up with a mechanic to handle that. or to just omit it. But I did bring in the food and water index chart from Outdoor Survival to add more realism, more challenge, which supports a solo game as well, because it gives the solo player those procedures that are necessary to keep a game moving forward. So if we look at OD&D Book 3, it tells us that a dungeon expedition is 1 week. And it goes on to say, the time for dungeon adventures considers only preparations and a typical 1-day descent into the pits. And timescales for dungeon expeditions are an abstract concept. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that rations would be treated in a similar fashion. So either way, the rules remain silent on the exact application of rations. This is clearly, as I've said, left up to the referee. So advancing 1 place on the food index chart has no effect on a character's abilities, but rather than rendering the advancement pointless, I decided there should be some effect. Because after all, a 1-day delve into a dungeon is an intense affair. It's not a walk on the beach. So my ruling was this. Rest must be taken every 3 turns instead of every 6. And this is a reflection of the hunger beginning to set in as the party are trying to make the rations go that little bit further. I could have completely ignored the whole thing and moved on, but I think especially in OD&D where the rules are given so sporadically, a good referee will use them to their advantage and make player choices matter, make resources and inventory management matter. Now, I did discuss this in one of my other sessions when we started getting into wilderness adventuring, and the party was starting to go out and explore the island of Pylea, which is where my campaign takes place. I did discuss sort of each stage, each step on the food and water index chart, how abilities are affected. So I said that advancing 1 place on the food index chart has no effect. It does have effects as you advance further along the food index chart. It's just in this instance, the party will only be advancing 1 place on the food index chart. So resource management is a vitally important part of solo gaming. And the reason for this is that it provides the framework to move the adventure forward, and it limits the use of oracles, which I think are almost the rut that solo TTRPGs have fallen into. For me, procedure is the best option. So, with prep done, conditions imposed, let's look at what happened during the delve. Essentially, what these conditions that I've imposed are doing is making it so that the party are spreading out what little food they have over the week, but it will result in them having to rest every half hour instead of every hour that they're in the dungeon, because they're essentially going to be in a weakened state during the delve, because the delve is the most intense part of the adventure, and it will obviously test the physical abilities of the characters. So with all that out of the way, let's look at what actually happened during the delve. So first I'm going to go into kind of present tense to set the mood of how the adventure began. So they arrive at the castle of the quest. The party cross the moat drawbridge and travel through the Barbican into the silent courtyard. As they make their way across the cracked pavement, they feel eyes all around them, staring down from the jagged bastions and towers. But nobody interferes. They let the adventurers come, an ample supply of fresh cadavers to use in who knows what ways, experimental subjects for deranged wizards, or simply food for the monstrous things that lurk in the maze below. It is not long before the questing knights reach the keep, descend the mouldering stairs into the maze. Ilara knows the way. She directs the burly fighting men to move ahead. Usually a pair of drunken rakes, but this time sober and in want of adventure, the rakes obey, moving forward from the small entrance chamber through a secret opening in the north wall, which they held open with an iron spike. They take a left at the end of a short passage, through a further previously concealed door. They also spike this one open. A longer passage leads southwest to a trapdoor in the centre of the floor, the entrance to a lower level of the maze. As they are about to reach it, they hear grunting sounds further down the passage. Hilda the dwarf quickly pulls open the trapdoor, and the whole party disappear into it with haste. So at this point, now I've sort of introduced and set the scene, I'm going to start talking about what happened in the past tense. So the party found themselves in a rectangular chamber running north to south. The south wall was lined with 4 doors, compressed into a 20-foot space. Hilda Stoneheft listened at the door with her superior dwarven hearing. She could hear shuffling and muffled voices coming from within. So the party had an encounter with 4 conjurers here, and despite hearing them, they did not manage to surprise them. The conjurers were ready, 4 in total, with 4 armoured foot guards, and the encounter took place at a 20-foot distance. So a quick roll determined the opposing force was of neutral alignment, and the party won the initiative and attempted to avoid combat by offering to split the treasure in the room if the conjurers agreed to go their separate way. And as usual, because she has the best charisma score, Brie Landell handled the negotiation and was given a +1 for the high charisma. But despite this, the reaction was negative. And this is how it works with OD&D a lot, because you don't get massive amounts of bonuses and penalties. The dice have so much more control over the randomness, which I kind of like. And to quote my old Tales of Mystara, no one is safe from the roll of the dice. So at this point, I randomly rolled for the possibility of magic items with the conjurers, and this, I believe, should be standard practice when encountering magic users, because in OD&D Book 2 it says explicitly that there is a chance that there will be magical accoutrements with the supernormal types, and by supernormal types it's talking about character types. So it says there's a 5% chance for magic users for each level, and you have to roll for a wand or staff, ring, and misc magic. So you've got 3 opportunities here at 5% per level of the magic user to for them to have a wand or a staff, a ring, or a misc magic item. And if you're very lucky, you might get all 3 of them. But at 5% per level, they have to be quite high level to stand much of a chance, but you know, the dice can be lucky. So this text is included in the section detailing the composition of bandits, but it absolutely makes sense in the wider context. For lack of any other option of determination. It only says it for bandits, but there's obviously going to be magic users that you meet in any context in a dungeon that would have a magic item. So to me, this was just the way that the book was edited to ensure it all fitted into the space limitations. So sometimes you'll get an example in one section, that kind of can apply to more sections, but you have to be very careful with this. But in this particular instance, there is no other reference, no other rules regarding how to determine at random what magic items a magic user will have when you come across them in a dungeon. And this decision has to be made, so it would make absolutely perfect sense that you would go with the 5% chance per level. And I'm pretty sure that this is one of the things that people who play OD&D by the book do, absolutely. So the rules indicate the Conjurers have in their possession, after I made the relevant rolls, a ring of water walking and a bag of holding. So I got very lucky with these rolls. This is some serious loot, and to have access to these things at level 1 is just such a good opportunity. So obviously at this point, when I was playing this session, I was thinking these conjurers need to go down. They need to go down. But because of the negative reaction roll, the 4 heavy foot guards immediately cut to melee distance. They were subject to pass-through fire at the halfway point, as chainmail rules indicate, and they took a single hit and a single kill. So one of the 4 heavy foot guards went down to one of the arrows of the characters, and the Conjurers chose to stay inside the doorway for cover. And Bree and Thrandir used their elven split move and fire ability to move into the room and fire at the Conjurers, scoring a single hit for 3 points of damage. So 3 of the Conjurers turned invisible at this point, but the 4th had their spell spoilt by the wounding from the elven arrow. So only 3 of them were able to do it because they did not suffer attack upon their person. And next, the Rakes were engaged in the melee that ensued from the charging heavyfoot guards. As 8th level fighters, they get 8 attacks each against the guards, which is a lot of attacks, 8 attacks each. And this is because, they get 1 attack for each of their combat levels. And according to the hit chart, they only need 12s to hit. So they absolutely effortlessly slay all 3 of the heavyfoot guards. And so at this point, with 33 and a third % of the opposition slain, the Conjurers are forced to roll a morale check. They fail the morale check and flee the scene. And as the morale rules in Chainmail suggest, monsters who fail morale checks are removed from play. So if you look at BX, I think, is one of them, and you look at maybe even in Homes, but I'm not sure it is in Homes, but Beckme definitely, they have evasion rules that cover parties pursuing, fleeing monsters, but the evasion rules in OD&D seem to be strictly talking about monsters pursuing players, and the only comment on what to do when it's the other way around is the standard chainmail rules, which, if we look at this from a systematic point of view, which is what I like to do when it comes to sorting out OD&D rules and figuring out how to play the game without presuming anything based on the knowledge of games that came later. You just presume that all chainmail rules apply, except where noted otherwise in the brown D&D books. So if we apply that logic, then looking at chainmail, monsters who fail morale checks are removed from play. because that's what would happen to troops who fail morale checks in both the man-to-man combat system or the mass combat system. So that's what I did. And the only exception, if we go back in chainmail, is that unless no route of retreat is open to them, then I think we get into rules about taking prisoners, which I haven't come across yet during this campaign, but I'm sure at some point I'll have an opportunity to delve into the implications of that as well. But here there were 2 doors on the south wall of the room, so the Conjurers escape taking those precious magic items with them, which, much to my absolute dismay. However, they did abandon the 400 gold pieces of treasure in the room, which I rolled randomly using my solo dungeon generation method, which if you've been watching from the beginning of this series, you'll know that I use Gary Gygax's solo dungeon generation rules in Strategic Review number 2. So next, the party followed the Conjurers shortly after they escaped through the same door because I was trying to get those magic items. So they went through the same door the Conjurers took, and they jammed it open with a spike in case they need to come quickly back through it again. And as they put the spike in, they were set upon by 4 large lizards who were as surprised as the party, and the encounter took place from an initial 30-foot distance. The party won the initiative. I'm not going to cover this encounter in detail as it wasn't that exciting, and I've covered quite a lot of combat encounters in detail in this video series so far. So I think by now you probably get the picture as to how I approach it. But if you have any questions, then comments or email solodungeoncrawler@gmail.com. So the only interesting part in this encounter was that the lizards were guarding 4 gems worth 2,600 gold pieces in total. So an incredibly lucky find for the party, and a fine example of those beautiful moments when the dice bring good luck. So after defeating the lizards, the party found a secret passage in the southeast corner of the room, which led down a long corridor with a putrid smell. There was an encounter here with 3 spectres who won the initiative, but through an uncertain reaction. So I ruled that they just hovered in the darkness ahead with expressions of agony and wails of suffering on their ghostly faces, their non-corporeal faces. And spectres are incredibly deadly, as only magical weapons can hurt them, and at this point none of my party have access to magical weapons. They have holy water and silver arrows, but even holy water and silver arrows are useless as spectres are non-corporeal. So the party had no choice but to flee, and were able to move up to 360 feet, and they escaped back through the secret door, and the spectres did give chase. But when the party moved back through a further door, they managed to lose the spectres. Lucky for them. And this time the party took a door to the west into unexplored territory, which so happened to be the lair of 2 Medusae. So I had an incredible amount of fun with this encounter. I was kind of stuck. I didn't know how to handle this encounter because obviously there's the whole thing about the Medusae being able to use stone gaze to turn characters to stone. It can turn itself to stone if it looks at itself, if it looks at a reflection, and all these things are quite ambiguous. And if you're playing solo, it's difficult to sort of come up with a fair and impartial procedure to roll through so that you don't metagame or play any unfair advantages. I started off looking at OD&D Book 3. It says, regarding the Medusae, that it's a human-type monster with the lower body of a snake, a human torso and a head, with tresses which are asps. It is able to turn those who look at its eyes to stone, while the bite of the snakes which cover its head is deadly poison. As it is intelligent, it will cleverly attempt to beguile victims into looking at it. It also is subject to the effects of its reflected gaze. Now, I don't know about you. It depends maybe on how old you are, but I think of the famous scene in Clash of the Titans. So there's lots to unpack regards to the description of the Medusa in OD&D book, not book 3. I said book 3, it's book 2. So there's lots of information, no specific mechanics, but it's much easier to solo with something specific to prevent unbalancing the challenge. The player character should not have agency over things beyond their control. So to overcome this problem, I looked at the entry in the AD&D monster manual to compare, and the Medusa in AD&D is essentially the same, but the entry has been expanded to include the specific mechanics we are seeking. Now, I know I do go to the AD&D DMG a lot, and I haven't had this comment yet, but I feel like it's inevitable that someone's going to say, why don't you just play AD&D? I don't want to play AD&D, I want to play OD&D, and I only use AD&D as a reference point in situations where I want to know how Gary might handle some of these mechanics that he didn't detail in OD&D, but everything I take out of AD&D is then filtered back through the OD&D system, and it usually results in me having to kind of change many aspects of how these things are handled in AD&D. So, I mean, you'll see an example with this as I discuss what I did with the Medusa. So here is the original OD&D entry with some AD&D clarifications added. So you'll see that all is going on here is it's essentially exactly the same monster, but there's some mechanical clarifications. And again, a lot of this is to take it out of my hands as a referee, because I want to remain impartial where I can. So I look at, how would Gary run this monster? And the nearest I can get to how he would have run it in an OD&D campaign is to look at what he said in the AD&D monster manual. So here is the description with the AD&D clarifications added. So the Medusae, is a human-type monster with the lower body of a snake, a human torso and head, with tresses, which are asps. It is able to turn those within 3 inches or 30 feet in a dungeon who look at its eyes to stone unless they make their saving throw versus being turned to stone. And while the bite of the snakes which cover its head is deadly poison, the range of such attacks is but 1 inch or 10 feet, and the victim, bitten, must save versus poison or die. As it is intelligent, it will cleverly attempt to beguile victims into looking at it. It also is subject to the effects of its reflected glance. So this monster is still behaving in the exact same way as described in OD&D. The only change is that we have used the same author for this original design to add clarity where ambiguity previously existed. We still aren't quite there though. The AD&D Monster Manual 2 offers some further useful mechanics. It has the following entry for Dracolisks. Chances of meeting the gaze of a Dracolisk or any large creature using a gaze weapon. So this covers any large creature, but it also covers creatures of other sizes, as you'll see when I continue with reading the text. So chances of meeting the gaze of a Dracolisk or any large creature using a gaze weapon are as follows. Add 1 if the creature is man-sized, such as Medusa. and 2 if the creature is small. So this is where we start to convert to OD&D, because AD&D handles surprise differently. So the OD&D conversion for Medusae, after removing levels of surprise and adding 2 for a man-sized creature, because Medusa is man-sized, these chances out of 10 are the chance that a character will not be able to avoid the stone gaze of the monster. So with the OD&D conversion, removing the levels of surprise, you have an 80% chance of being subject to the monster's gaze if you are surprised. You have a 60% chance if you're viewing the monster, 40% if attacking normally, and 20% if you're actively avoiding the gaze. Let's take these mechanics and see how this encounter actually played out. So there was no surprise, and the party luckily won the initiative. The rakes rushed straight forward into the melee. The Medusa can either use its gaze, touch, or normal attack ability. So I made the decision with a d6, and the dice indicated that the Medusa will try and touch a character to turn them into stone. Meanwhile, the rest of the party moved into the room, and Elara pulled out her silver mirror. Bree and Thrandir used their split move and fire, scoring 2 hits and 8 damage. Viridis and Hilda fired crossbows. I allowed them to move and fire because they beat their opponent's die roll, as per chainmail rules. But they missed. The rakes got 1 attack each. They don't get 8 attacks against the Medusa because the Medusa is not a base 1 hit die or less, so it's only 1 attack per round. So they got 1 attack each. They scored 1 hit, but that hit only resulted in 1 point of damage. The Medusae get their return blows. These are touches, as the d6 said, and they're both successful, so the rakes were turned to stone. They failed their saving throws and they were turned to stone. So there are a couple more statues in this lair of the Medusa. The second round, the party won the initiative again, luckily. Viridis and Hilda moved into good firing positions. The elves stayed put and fired twice. The Medusa decided to use their gaze this time, and unfortunately Thrandir caught the gaze and was also turned to stone. So that's 3 more statues in the lair. The party's missile weapons scored 3 hits and 11 damage. On the third round, the party won initiative again. Elara passed her mirror to Ascalante, who attempted to trick one of the creatures. He moved up to a statue to the right of the creature to use as cover and hold the mirror out. 2 more missile hits were scored and one of the creatures was killed, but the other passed the morale check. The remaining creature caught her own gaze in the mirror, but saved. Here's another point of discussion that I want to bring up here. OD&D doesn't offer much clarity on how monster saving throws should be handled. The only clarity offered was in Strategic Review Issue 2, where Gary, in the D&D FAQ, said that saving throws for monsters are the same as for the appropriate type and level of man, i.e. a Balrog would gain the saving throw of either a 10th level fighter or a 12th level magic user, the latter based upon the Balrog's magic resistance. Whichever score is the more favourable for the Balrog. A troll would be equal to a 7th level fighter, as it has 6 dice plus 3, which is virtually 7 dice. So this is a bit ambiguous. I feel like that's the word of the day today. So I basically put together a table to kind of compute everything that Gary was saying here and to try and reconcile it. And to even begin to reconcile it, the first thing I did was organise the table so that fighters and magic users were ordered into progressions of 3 levels. So it was basically just rearranging it, because in the normal saving throw table, magic users are usually in levels of 5. They advance in levels of 5. So I reorganized it into levels of 3. So it was basically just reorganizing it. I didn't change anything. I just reorganized it to make it more readable in order to figure out how to go to the next step in reconciling these saving throws. So I changed fighters to standard, which represents all standard monsters without magical resistance. Then I replaced magic users with magic resistance and altered the numbers so the highest score of either the fighter or magic user was kept. So back to the fight. On the 4th and final round of combat, the party won the initiative again for the 4th time. So they're partially lucky, but they've had 3 of their group turn to stone, so not too lucky really. So on the 4th round, they managed to skewer the remaining Medusa with an arrow to end the encounter. And lucky for the party, as this was the monster's lair, which I determined by rolling, looking at the monster reference table in OD&D Book 2 and rolling the percentile to determine whether it was the monster's lair or not. And in this case it was. So then I rolled on the treasure table, and the lair contained 9,000 gold pieces, which is an incredible amount of treasure. So at this point, encumbrance was an issue because they can only carry about 3,500 gold and stay at heavy foot movement speed. The treasure was in iron trunks, and if they tried to carry the treasure out as is, they would be forced to reduce their speed to armoured foot, which would slow them down, make them more vulnerable to encounters with wandering monsters. And don't forget, they have to rest more because of the rationing of the rations. They chose to take the iron trunk and carry it out because they're heroes and they want the money. So they just about managed to escape with these iron trunks. They were very lucky. They managed to make it out. They loaded up the horses with the treasure and abandoned the iron trunks and rode successfully back to town. So in a nutshell, that's how this particular adventure turned out. So I've gone through a lot. I've covered a lot in this video, but obviously I've been out of the game for about 6-7 weeks where I didn't put a video up. So I'm trying to catch up with myself basically under the pressures of playing one time. But yeah, this was a pretty successful delve. Apart from obviously they've lost the rakes, but I'm not sure the rakes probably would have stayed with them for very long because they weren't necessarily loyal. And the funny thing is, because the rakes were turned to stone, they don't have to worry about the rakes taking a double share, so they were even more lucrative having lost the 2 rakes, and they only lost 1 member of their own party. So that is the most lucrative adventure they've had to date. So yeah. Thanks for joining me and listening to me waffle on about original D&D for so long. Please do check back for more content in the future. And as I always say, have a great week. And I will see you in the next session.